The Great White Throne Judgment. This will be a Bible-based evaluation of the Great White Throne Judgment in Matthew, chapter 25, presented by myself, Richard L. Guthrie. Some claim that Matthew 25, verses 31 and 32 refers to the Great White Throne Judgment that will occur at the end of the millennium. Others contend that it is impossible for these verses to refer to the Great White Throne Judgment. It has only to do with the judging of nations at the second coming. This study evaluates from Scripture and not emotion the most probable judgment occurring in Matthew 25 verses 31 and 32. Before I go any further, there are some rules that I've applied to this study. Read the Scriptures carefully. Do not add anything to what is written. Do not omit anything that is written. And I've stayed with the King James Version and will not be deviating from that. For more information regarding this topic and other related topics, I highly recommend you review my book, The Rapture from the Ground Up. Again, Richard L. Guthrie. Let's first read what Matthew 25 verses 31 and 30 through 34 and also verse 41 presents. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. Let's review the Great White Throne Judgment found in Revelation, chapter 20, verses 11 through 14. And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. And the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things that were written in the books, according to the works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were judged every man according to the works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Matthew 25 verses 31 through 34 is an area of contention as to whether it refers to the Great White Throne Judgment, detailed in Revelation 20 verses 11 through 14. It is postulated that this cannot refer to the Great White Throne Judgment because of the following reasons. 1. There is no resurrection in Matthew 25. Revelation 20 verse 13 refers to the resurrection of the dead unbelievers. Number 2, nations are being judged in Matthew 25. The Great White Throne Judgment pertains to an individual's unbelief and rebellion. Third reason, the time is presumed to be at the return of Christ, at the second coming. The Great White Throne Judgment in Revelation occurs at the end of the millennium. Number 4, there are 3 groups of people present, goats, sheep, and brethren in Matthew. The Great White Throne Judgment of Revelation focuses on the unbelievers. Believers are mentioned indirectly in Revelation 21 and verse 4. The scene is on the earth in Matthew 25. It is assumed that the Great White Throne Judgment is taking place in heaven. No books are opened in Matthew 25. The Lamb's Book of Life is open at the Great White Throne Judgment in Revelation 20 verse 12. Let's take a look at each of these objections to see whether there is merit to the argument. Matthew 25 is a continuation of the 3 questions the apostles asked Jesus in Matthew 24:3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? The account in Matthew is just providing the apostles with the signs associated with the end of the world. It is an outline or just the high points that Jesus is providing. There are many details Jesus doesn't need to address in providing an answer to the apostles regarding these three questions. When shall these things be? What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? The resurrection of the dead and opening of the books are not mentioned here because of the nature of the questions being answered. This doesn't preclude them from happening at this time. The resurrection is not directly relevant to answering the apostles' questions. Not mentioning the resurrection is not unexpected in Matthew 25. In verse 32, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. Once Jesus has established his reign, which means he has established the millennial kingdom, he gathers all the nations. When this happens is not detailed here. It could easily be 1,000 years after the second coming at the end of the millennial kingdom. Contrary to the postulated argument, nations are not being judged. They have only been gathered. After the nations are gathered, the separation of sheep and goats begins under individual accountability, one from another, and the individualized judgment later on of hellfire. When the Son of Man, in verse 31, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne. Jesus comes in his glory. This is definitely the second coming. Jesus will sit on his throne during his reign and during the millennium, which is after the second coming and all the events associated with it. This event clearly happens some duration after the second coming and not at the second coming. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. At the second coming, Jesus confronts armies and sets his foot on the Mount of Olives. This event in verse 31, sitting on the throne, must take place some interval after the second coming. Jesus has set up and established the millennial kingdom. The assumption that this occurs immediately at the return of Christ, or the second coming, is false. Since this takes place after the second coming, it could easily be referencing the end of the millennium and the great white throne judgment 1,000 years later. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. There are three groups present in the millennium: believers, unbelievers, and those that have been raptured and are reigning with Christ. Those that are judged come from the nations he has gathered and are not just the nations. In other words, it is not a national judgment presented here. Raptured saints ruling and reigning with Christ already have glorified bodies and are not part of this separation. The raptured saints would thus be in the background, reigning with Christ. There is no problem with three groups being present in either scenario. It will include the same type of groups that will be present at the great white throne judgment. Believers, those raptured from, and those from the millennium, are referenced indirectly in Revelation 20 and verse 15 because there will be those that have their names written in the book of life. In verse 34, then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. We know that these are individuals because the reward is an inheritance into the eternal kingdom, the only kingdom that has been prepared since the beginning of the world. Nations do not have an inheritance in the eternal kingdom, only individuals. The only time a judgment is followed by an inheritance of the eternal kingdom occurs at the great white throne judgment. A kingdom prepared from the foundation of the world strongly implies that this particular kingdom was prepared for all believers from Adam and Eve onward. The millennial kingdom is but a temporary kingdom established for Israel and will be destroyed, Revelation 21:1. The kingdom referenced is most likely the eternal kingdom established for all believers. The location where the great white throne judgment takes place is not identified in Revelation 20. It would not make sense for God to bring sinners into heaven for such a judgment. Whether or not this event takes place on earth or in heaven is not a feature that identifies or determines if this can or cannot be the great white throne judgment. The following verses, Matthew 25 verses 36 to 46, present part of the criteria used to determine the righteous from the unrighteous. This criteria or standard is consistent with the actions of all those who have their names written in the Lamb's Book of Life. There is obviously some standard used to establish the righteous from the unrighteous. In Revelation, the Lamb's Book of Life was specifically cited as that standard. However, just because the Lamb's Book of Life is not referenced in Matthew 25 does not mean that it hasn't been used for this judgment. At the second coming, Jesus does not destroy all unbelievers. Zechariah 14:16. Once Jesus establishes the millennial kingdom, he calls Israel out from the nations. And that's found in Malachi 3:16, Ezekiel 20 verses 33 through 38, chapter 37 verses 11 through 28, Zechariah 13 verses 8 and 9, Zechariah 14:16. This is the time when Israel becomes true believers. Those that remain are not condemned with hellfire. They are obligated to worship Jesus Christ as a priestly king, Zechariah 14:16, or they will be cursed. The fact that only unbelievers will be the initial ones entering the millennial kingdom is shown in another video by that name. It is also found in both of my books referenced at the end of this video. The objections raised have no substance or merit in proving that these verses in Matthew 25 reference anything but the great white throne judgment. In fact, having it fit the second coming requires a lot of creativity. The reasonable conclusion based on the reward given to the believers and the judgment of unbelievers, these verses, Matthew 25, verses 31 through 34, all end with the great white throne judgment. The Matthew 25 is not the great white throne judgment argument is one of many fallacies used to build a pre-tribulational rapture position. A Bible study using garbage in is going to end up with a Bible study with garbage out. Garbage in, garbage out. You can't get away from that. You'll never arrive at God's truth if your basic assumptions are flawed. The question comes down to whether one believes in what the Bible actually presents, or does one want to believe in a fable that is orchestrated to reinforce an erroneous rapture position? Based on the Bible and not a twisted concept of it, the great white throne judgment is found in Matthew 25 verses 31 to 34. Don't take my word for any of this. Check it out for yourself. 2 Timothy 2:15 admonishes us to study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. In Acts 17:11, these were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the scriptures daily whether those things were so. Only then can you be sure that you are not being deceived during these last days. Matthew 24 and verse 4, Jesus tells us that there will be believers that will be deceived. You don't need to be one of them. Again, for more information regarding this topic and other related topics, I highly recommend either of my books, The Rapture from the Ground Up or The Great Tribulation, again, by Richard L. Guthrie. Thank you for watching and for listening.